All righty, here we go. So Lucas and I are back for another Bitcoin study session. We are currently working through Lyn Alden's Broken Money, Why Our Financial System is Failing Us, and How We Can Make It Better. So we did the introduction, chapters 1 and 2 last time. The thesis, kind of broadly writ, of this book, its mission, as Lyn Alden states in the introduction, is that at its core, money is a ledger. Commodity money serves as a ledger governed by nature. Bank money serves as a ledger governed by nation states. Open source money serves as a ledger governed by users. This book explores the evolution of technology, how that changes the prevailing power structures and incentives surrounding money from era to era. So we saw some of that development last time. We did chapter 1, ledgers as the foundation of money. So I guess first, I'll do a brief summary of chapters 3 and 4, which we're going to talk about today. And then Lucas and I will add some hashing power to this, hash it all out. I'll do just a little run up into chapters 3 and 4 to get everybody situated, and then into 3 and 4, and then into the conversation. So again, chapter 1 was ledgers as the foundation of money. Alden began with a little bit of anthropology or history in this book. Money began not as coins, but as a ledger, which can be written or oral or based in memory. And the ledger is just this abstract thing, a summary of transactions that is used to keep track of who owns what. The whole concept or the thing of money itself arises later as a ledger that is maintained by nature. That's kind of the first instantiation of money we get in chapter 2, the evolution of commodities as money. So the ledger as maintained by nature depends most essentially on scarcity. When we have the ledger maintained through a thing we call commodity money, we determine what is the most scarce asset that we value, and that becomes a form of money. We then learn that one way to hack or debase, or the only way rather to hack or debase nature's ledger, is through new technology, such as, for example, if beads are used as money, then a technology that allows for the super efficient production of beads will give one party the upper hand and allow them to dilute the wealth and transfer it to themselves. So chapter 3, that's what we're first talking about today, how gold won the commodity war. So again, scarcity determines essentially, along with some other characteristics, but primarily scarcity determines what commodity arises as money, and then technology then will invalidate the use of certain commodities, prevent them from being used as monies. So how did gold win the commodity war? Well, first, we see that gold and silver do survive the filtering function that technology provides for in filtering out through determining what commodities are not scarce. Gold and silver, they come to the top. Less scarce money falls out of the equation. Gold and silver have a high stock to flow ratio. There's a low stock coming into production per the amount of gold in existence, so it's not suffering from terminal inflation. Gold and silver are able to survive their monetary premium through, as Alden frames it, a sort of ongoing difficulty adjustment. As surface deposits are mined, it gets more and more difficult to get at other sources of gold and silver. Even as our technology in mining and extraction increases, there is that quote unquote kind of ongoing difficulty adjustment provided by the difficulty in accessing new sources of gold. So gold and silver arise as the champion commodity monies. We then have an innovation, or one of the reasons they arise too, is we have this innovation of coinage, legal tender coinage, which further enhances gold and silver as money. So coins, that's simply when an authority specifies a standard unit size, weight, and quality. We of course know what a coin is, that circular disc that has those standardized qualities. This authority will also then specify that that is legal tender, that it be used as currency, which gives gold and silver as legal tender coinage 3 layers of value in Alden's estimation. First is the content of the precious metal itself, but second is also a verifiability and convenience. It's verifiable. Each coin is stamped perhaps with the leader or emperor's face, authenticating it. And there's also ridges on the sides to prevent shaving. also convenience. You don't have that provides that verifiability provides for a sort of convenience. You don't have to retest to determine if it is real gold. You don't have to reweigh it each time there's a transaction. So that's the second layer of value. The content of the metal itself is the first layer of value. The second layer is the verifiability and convenience of having a coin. The third layer of value added by legal tender coinage onto precious metals is a sort of liquidity that's provided, a liquidity premium that's provided by the wide and mandated acceptance of this coin. If it's mandated, then it's going to be sort of universally accepted by merchants. So we have this gold and silver rising to the top as commodities used as money, and we have legal tender coinage kind of abetting that. But then legal tender coinage allows for debasement. When debasement occurs, when these coins that are supposed to be standardized are now the authority that prints them then begins to mix in other less valuable metals with them. So the debasement occurs now because people have this kind of abstract unit in their head of coin. And so once it's debased, they kind of gradually realize that, hey, these new unit of coin that are supposedly standardized are actually less valuable because they have less of the precious metal in them, which is that first layer of value. It's also a gradual debasement, again, because people do have the presumption that coins are not debased. And there also is the fact that they're legal tender coinage, so they, in fact, may be mandated to use them. So as leaders begin to debase gold and silver as currencies by mixing in less precious metals, people begin to hoard the coins that do have the pure content, and people from outside jurisdictions, in fact, who don't have to abide by the mandated usage, will simply extract the more valuable coins and get away with those. So legal tender coinage does allow for debasement. I've mentioned how gold and silver rose to the top of commodities to become the commodity money that is used due to their scarcity and ability to survive technological innovation. Then gold wins over silver. This is for two reasons, Alden mentions. The first is a sort of historical contingency, just the fact that England set their standard a certain way and did begin to use gold. England had this kind of dominant empire. Its network effects then kind of led to gold being used more and more dominantly. The second reason is simply that the best money wins. Gold's drawback is kind of a lack of, not a lack, but it kind of lacks a certain divisibility because gold is so valuable, it's tough to divide it off into a small enough portion that you can get like a slice of bread or whatever. So people would use silver in a bimetallic standard to supplement gold. Silver is less valuable, so you can use that for more daily exchanges. But with the emergence of banking, then people begin to are able to divide their gold into smaller units by depositing with a bank and making paper claims against it. So gold has higher stock to flow than silver. And now that banking emerges, it also has more divisibility. And so gold rises above silver and wins as the best commodity money. So there's these two reasons. Again, the historical contingent reason of England's usage of gold, and the second reason of gold being the best money. Alden agrees with both, kind of says that the second reason is a little bit more deeper in explanation and better, but synthesizes both, saying that banknotes made gold more divisible and thus the harder money won over time, but network effects from political decision can impact the timing and specific geographic spread of these sorts of changes. And I wanted to mention that synthesis because that's what Alden's going to be doing in these two chapters we're looking at, is kind of synthesizing two perspectives, and she's really good at that. So the end of this chapter, chapter 3, gold wins. It's still monetary, even though we begin to have paper claims against it, but it's kind of mainly as a store of value. And gold wins again because it's the most saleable. And we can still see, even though gold at this point becomes the gold standard, kind of paper claims being made against gold, you could still wear your gold on your person. It's portable. You could go to another jurisdiction, and wherever you go, you could likely find somebody else who would buy the gold off you. Chapter 4 is a unified theory of money. So we've primarily got sort of a historical or anthropological account in chapters 1 and 2, and even chapter 3, until now. And now we're going to get kind of a theoretic perspective on money before we got like how money actually did arise, how it was used, why certain monies became better monies, etc. The two theoretical camps regarding the definition and origin of money. First is the commodity theory. The commodity theory is that money at its core is a commodity, and the best commodity wins. And so Alden says, quote, "The primary concept presented by this theory of money is that barter is inefficient due to needing to satisfy the double coincidence of wants, and therefore a highly saleable good that is resistant to debasement, for example, gold or silver, naturally arises in a society as a unit of account, medium of exchange, and a store of value to reduce the frictions of commerce." So that's the commodity theory of the nature of money, that a commodity that is scarce, the most scarce, and therefore it has these other qualities, make it the most saleable, rises to the top and becomes what is used as money. A key aspect of this theory is that money is kind of therefore independent of the state. It emerges naturally to satisfy the economic necessity of having an efficient means of exchange. So that's the commodity theory of money. A separate theory, the other theory, is then the credit theory. The credit theory is that credit, not commodities, is at the core of what money is. So credit then, the credit theory says that a sale is an exchange of a good, not for a commodity, but for a credit, a favor or a promise of future payment. So the credit system is then in more complex societies through banks, debts and credits of a community are centralized, and the right to payment for the credit is not just against the person, but against others in the community who also owe debts. That's kind of the more complex elaboration. And the less complex elaboration, it's just that you do me a favor, I do you, or you give me something I need, and I promise to do something for you in the future. A favor is offered and tendered, and then you accept that credit. So that's the credit theory. Money is credit. These, you may have sensed hearing the elaboration of both of these that there is a political angle to these, and Alden acknowledges that. The commodity theorists tend to favor small government. Money is an emergent phenomena outside of government. Simply whatever commodity has the qualities that are going to make it the most saleable, that is going to rise to the top and be used as money by people as a sort of emergent solution, like the Stone of Jordan example from last time. It's simply people will arrive at the thing they're going to use as money. The government does not top down impose what money is. Commodity theorists also believe that government printed money, to the extent it exists, should be backed with the best emergent commodity money. So that's the commodity theorists in a sort of politicized way. The credit theorists in a sort of politicized way is that they have this presumption maybe for a larger role for government, where money is a top-down thing. It's a social product tied to a specific socio-political organization. It's not like a natural real-world piece of gold. It's simply however that a society is going to enforce and define obligation amongst parties, this idea of credit. And the credit theorists tended to also believe that the state should issue currency to achieve its goals and not be bound by the scarcity that a commodity is bound by virtue of its nature. So Alden, again, is having a unified theory between these two theories. She's synthesizing, and we look back at her anthropology and history, and we've seen previously that both of these visions have value, that hunter-gatherers had both the concept of proto-money, like shells and things like that were commodities, and they also had the concept of credit, of this oral and memory-based ledger of doing favors amongst each other. So both are in the historical record. And then Alden looks at what both theories do right and wrong before she proposes how to unify the theories. So the commodity theorists, what they do right. The hardest money does, in fact, tend to emerge. She gave us the history of gold in the previous chapter, how it did arise to the top to be used as the commodity money because of the physical qualities it had. What is incorrect, though, about the commodity theorists, Alden says, is that they kind of premise their whole theory on the idea that historically the problem of barter is what stimulated the need for money, that there was the double coincidence of wants where I have spears to trade, but you have nothing I want, and so there's a failed transaction. But Alden says the anthropology, the actual history of the situation shows us that social credit did actually solve the problem of barter for small-scale human societies, and in fact, even predated humans, with apes reciprocally picking mites off each other's backs in a sort of credit system. Humans then simply elaborated and make this reciprocation that is credit more complex and extensive. So that's what's good and bad about the commodity theory. That brings us then to the social credit, the credit theorists rather. What they got right then is exactly that, anthropology or history. Alden says, quote, "Human interaction is, at its very core, a series of formal or informal credits and debits to others, and is organized by rituals and rules that are tied to our evolutionary instincts, our earliest religions, and our earliest governing structures." So again, it's essentially a human thing that we did and are capable of using credit as a sort of money. But that's what credit theorists get right about credit as money. What they get wrong, though, Alden notes deficiencies that credit has as a form of money. First is that credit still needs a unit of account. It still needs a way to kind of denominate the value of credit in other terms so that people are able to actually use it. As the way that we denominate the value of it needs to stay constant when you denominate it in terms of wheat or gold or something, because if it's just I have a favor or credit for 3 cases of beer and 1 steak, it's still just then I have to barter those credits, and we're right back at the barter problem. So credit still needs a unit of account. Second, another deficiency is, what if you leave the community? Credit is really tied to the community you're in. You have done favors and been offered credit to the people, your friends and kin who are around you. And if you go to another community, we need something that's more universally recognized that they will accept in the other community. Third, the third problem or deficiency with the credit theorists, their idea of the definition and origin of money is that it doesn't scale. Sure, in a small trust-based society where everybody knows everybody, you can have credit as a form of money, but once we get beyond that, and here's a quote from Alden I really love, quote, "Honor as a concept is incredibly important for human interactions, but does not scale well in an impersonal bureaucracy." So credit kind of depends on this honor-based system. I'm going to, in the future, actually fulfill the debt I have to you, the credit I've extended. But again, in impersonal bureaucracies, in nation states with millions of people, we can't really count on that trust-based credit to maintain its value. Which brings us to kind of the overarching problem with credit systems that Alden mentions: devaluation. The debasement of currency seems to be a universal aspect of credit-based systems that attempt to scale beyond local communities into greater nation states. The credit theorists basically rely on unwarranted assumptions to believe that credit will retain its value once we begin to have these bigger, more complex societies. First, they assume highly competent and altruistic leaders that are going to maintain the strength and viability of these credits we extend. However, Alden points out that history shows that debts are often discharged, devalued, and defaulted. Societies crumble. Classes are given debt jubilees. So the credits and debts are just don't retain their value. Historically, abstract credit has been one of the worst performing assets to hold. You should always prefer to hold something material. Gold, for example, has done much better historically. As governments rise and fall, again, a commodity has been a much better thing to hold when centralized custodians are not to be trusted. The assumption, again, that leaders will be highly competent and altruistic has not been borne out by history. The other unwarranted assumption that credit theorists make as to why currency will not be devalued if it is maintained as credit by a centralized authority is that credit theorists, some of them have argued that debasement only occurs in response to war, plague, and other disasters when like a centralized authority has to pivot to take care of something that they didn't expect to happen. Alden counters, though, that historically it appears debasement actually preceded and led to war. She says, quote, however, what Mitchell Inez missed, he's a credit theorist, I contend, was that the ability to debase the money contributes to the likelihood of war and several other forms of damaged productivity occurring in the first place. The temptation for a ruler to debase coinage is too great to overcome because it's usually the path of least resistance when faced with a problem. So Alden notes, maybe, oftentimes we could avoid a war if rulers had to explicitly tax people, which tends to be very unpopular, instead of being able to secretly tax people through debasing the currency. So credit actually leads to war, it's not a response to it, Alden notes. So those are the good things and the bad things about the commodity theory and the credit theory. Alden then gives us a unified theory of money. She synthesizes these two theories. She says, quote, she says that the ledger is the key. Quote, rather than adhere to the commodity theory of money or the credit theory of money to the exclusion of the other, a more complete theory must find the underlying logic or foundation that both theories share. And what they share is that they both represent ways to maintain a ledger, but with different maintainers of the ledger. So credit theorists posit that the maintainer of the ledger is a human, a centralized authority who is going to maintain the ledger of credit in the society. This maybe works in small groups when it's done informally through friend and kin, but for large groups, centralized administrative states, it tends to not work well. Commodity theorists hold that the maintainer of the ledger is nature itself. The ledger of a physical commodity is settled by physical exchanges between parties on the spot, not deferred as credit, of a thing that's highly saleable based on its physical qualities. So social ledgers may be convenient and efficient, but they're prone to debasement. Commodity ledgers are relatively inconvenient and inefficient, but they're not prone to debasement. The concluding concept, though, is, again, that what's key is the ledger. I'll give a final quote because this sums up the theory that Alden has arrived at based on synthesizing commodity and credit theories. Quote, a ledger theory of money, that's the theory she's arrived at, observes that most forms of exchange are improved by having a saleable unit of account that can be held and transferred over both time and space, and that this unit of account applies the existence of a ledger either literally, which would be commodities, or in the abstract, which is credit. These monetary units and the ledger that defines them rely either on human administrators, credit, or on natural laws, commodities, to maintain their stability across time and space. So that is the unified theory of money. Money is not essentially a commodity and not essentially a credit. It is essentially a ledger, a summary of transactions that is used to keep track of who owns what. So that's the summary of chapters 3 and 4. And so, Lucas, to kick it back to you, I got kind of a methodological question. We can just not swing at the wiffle ball, or you can take it. The question is it important to have an abstract definition of money in this way? Like, what is money? Going back to the essentials that underlying both commodities and credits as money, there's this more abstract concept of a ledger. I mean, do you think it's important that we have a theory like that tries to unify these things as Alden has done?
I would say I think it's important. I'm not entirely certain it's useful. And this is something I've been thinking about over the last couple of days after reading this, and especially after hearing you summarize it, which is credit and the abstract ledger that it represents, I believe, could be the oldest example of abstraction that humans have created. because even before having any sort of language or hand signals or writing or anything, the I groom you, you groom me type of thing does exist. And so I got to thinking about that. And so she has them. And so we're kind of jumping into chapter 4 with this, but I like where you're going because this has kind of been the thought that's been hanging on my head, which is that so she defines two theories of money, credit and commodity, and then kind of takes from them in order to come up with a unified theory of money. But when I look at it, what I actually see is that money is a technology, abstract money, the social credit score, social credit system, social credit ledger, flexible social ledger was the first money, and commodity money was the second money, and commodity money existed because credit money didn't work. Sorry, commodity money existed because it did the job better than credit money.
It improved upon a problem it had. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think about, I don't think of them really as two competing theories. I think of them as one and then the other. I think of credit as the four-way tire iron, and I think of commodity money as the impact wrench. Like, the impact wrench has not been around nearly as long, but it does the job better, and therefore it is dominant within the realm of changing tires. So
I mean,
that's kind of what I thought.
I mean, I think that's what the Austrian economic school says as well. Like, they just go forward with the commodity theory of money. And then the credit theorists tend to be, Alden mentions in this chapter, modern monetary theory, Keynesians, and then also she mentions the anthropologist David Graeber's work, The Book Debt, which I've read like a third of that. It's actually a phenomenal book. So Alden isn't just wholeheartedly, full-throatedly or whatever, embracing Austrian economics, as you kind of, as a lot of Bitcoiners do, and as you indicate that you see that as an advance and it makes sense. And I think that's because so rhetorically, I guess I like it because it is an olive branch reaching out to credit theorists. They do still exist. Yeah. And it is so like, right. Yeah. Fiat people who do like look at fiat money might say, it's not perfect, but it is what we have. And it has quote unquote worked. I mean, Bitcoiners say, no, it hasn't for these reasons, but it is a powerful school, I guess. And so if Alden says, okay, yeah, hold still 1 second. Here, some of the things you guys say are okay, and some of the things the commodity theorist says is okay. You're saying the same thing though. Like, what matters is this underlying idea of the ledger. And so, I mean, like, and I think maybe this is what you kind of meant by it's important, but not, I forget what you said, important but not useful. It's like the idea of the ledger is so foundational. It's like seems important, but it becomes so abstract. One wonders what the practical use of this wholly abstract ledger concept underlying both schools is, if it's not to adjudicate between them and say commodity theorists are better, then of what use is this kind of ghostly abstract idea of a ledger? And, maybe we haven't got that yet. Like, that's where Alden is going to go with, like, I think she says an open source ledger is where she's going to go for the future of money with Bitcoin. And so we'll see if she gets there. But on this front, I think you hit like a really interesting thing here. And I want to throw one thing back to you because this is a point I noted. Maybe there are some things that credit theorists get right. So here is Mitchell and Ness describing abstract credits as the perfect form of money. Why credit is important, why credits are good money, Mitchell and Ness says, is no corporeal existence, no weight, takes up no room, easily transferred with no formality required, movable at will through small cost, the telegram, can store it with little expense, and you can use it to pay for anything you need. That sounds like qualities of another thing that we like.
Sounds like Bitcoin.
Sounds like Bitcoin, right?
That sounds exactly like Bitcoin.
Yeah. And so, I mean, maybe credit theorists don't realize that why credit is good is actually why Bitcoin is good too. Maybe there is something that can be extracted from the credit theory to help credit theorists see what the Austrian economists have tended to see with more foresight.
That's interesting. So credit theorists are effectively treating credit as a bearer instrument, like the holder of the debt. Essentially, they're trying to say owns whatever that debt, um, whatever that debt can be repaid with. Like,
It's kind
because
of
that's interesting. Because Bitcoin is a bearer instrument,
yeah.
yet it perfectly satisfies all the qualities of credit money.
What makes those good things about credit. I do
Yeah,
think that like maybe credit is not perfectly a bearer asset because at the end of the day, it is like an obligation enforced by a third party. You do need that
right.
centralized authority.
Yeah,
Yeah, right. So
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And so, like, um, first, I want to say I do believe that Lyn Alden is being incredibly magnanimous, and kind by giving so much credence and offering a seat at the table to credit money. Um, and she's kind, when you see her interact. She's funny, really funny, but has good clapbacks, and really I think is kind of a unifying force. But yeah, I think bringing it to the table and giving it some legitimacy, to me, I I can see how, if you're very new to the concept of considering what money is, I can see how that's really beneficial to be like, okay, we're going to put these two things on a scale and we're going to kind of compare them, and we're going to see what sort of shakes out. But yeah, I guess to me, and it was her writing that clarified it too. To me, it was just this very simple thing of like, oh, there's a horse and then there's a car, or there's a milkman and then there's a refrigerator. Like,
Yeah.
just one came before the other, and the other did not need to exist but for the fact that the one before it had faults. Um, there's something I had a thought that I wanted to throw at you, which was,
Hmm.
so she talks about, so I want to first define gold. The third chapter is about gold emerging as the dominant commodity money. I want to first redefine that as, arose by any other name, and just get rid of the idea that gold is somehow special. It just turns out that it is relatively the best at satisfying the certain characteristics of
Hmm.
money that lead to a natural, inclination to use it. This goes back to kind of how I view, and I hope this might be useful for other people to view money, which is to say, I'm drafting for a football team. I'm drafting a quarterback. I need to get touchdowns. I don't want interceptions. I need yards, and and I want to avoid sacks or something like that. So those are like the purposes of money. And Alden talks about the three purposes of money. There's actually a fourth one that I saw somebody else talk about online, which I thought was brilliant, which was a means of payment. So um, you've got the unit of account, the medium of exchange, and the store of value. So
Hmm.
like dollars are a means, are there, we think of them as a means of payment as well, but that's not actually true. The means of payment would be like cash, check, credit card, debit card, Venmo.
Okay. Yeah.
Like, it's how do you transfer the medium of exchange, which is the
Yeah.
dollar. Um, so anyways, so think about drafting your quarterback, and those are the touchdowns, the yards, the sacks, the interceptions, etc. Those are the statistics that you want to show up on the back of their football card. And then you have to go to the NFL Combine, and you have to look at all these. Here's their hand grip. They're like, here's their hand strength. Here's how many times they do 225. Here's how fast they run. Like, these
Hmm.
are those characteristics that she talks about that lead to what good money are: divisibility, portability,
Yeah.
recognizability, verifiability. There's some, I think there's some that she doesn't mention, but I think there's also some that she doesn't mention because they are really kind of exclusive only to Bitcoin, which would be like immutability and incorruptibility. Like,
Yeah.
that just does not exist otherwise. Um,
because
So
those are things you don't find in any physical commodity. So the commodity theory of money, like here are physical characteristics, it's nature's ledger. Here are physical things about a thing in the world. Yeah.
yes, 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 absolutely, absolutely. But anyway, okay, so the very extenuated,
Hmm.
the super long intro for me to ask you this question was, uh, um, so she talks about how gold led to effectively credit money, or led to gold certificates being issued
Yeah.
to be redeemable for gold because of the fact that she says that divisibility was an issue with gold.
Hmm.
And I I want to push back on that because I think that it's not divisibility because silver is actually um, gold is actually more divisible than silver. It's softer, it's easier to divide. What we're talking about is density, and
Hmm.
it's the fact that the value is so great per unit that it's difficult to divide it into units small enough to use on a daily basis. And I would say that we need to redefine that and say that it's not the divisibility. The divisibility is easy. It's the density, which is actually the problem, which is that
Yeah.
value per unit is so high that it renders it useless to be used as money,
Right.
which is, I think, fascinating because what is the solution to that? Which is to have infinite value per unit, which is to have matterless, massless. You know, Bitcoin, you can have $1 trillion nowhere, everywhere, without weight, without space. It's not taking up room.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
don't have to carry it anywhere. Um, so, anyways, I wanted to throw that at you to see if do you think I'm thinking along the right lines here when I say that it's actually density, value density, that leads us to select a money, and that density of value, um, as it approaches greater and greater densities, as it becomes more and more dense per unit of value, actually creates more and more problem because it leads to what we saw with gold, which is so dense that you can't divide it to use it every day, which means that we're going to centralize it and issue certificates against it. And once we centralize it, we have the problem with any sort of centralization, which is that we have a trusted authority, and therefore we have opportunity for rambunctiousness to occur.
Yeah. So yeah, I see what you're saying about density being the issue and not divisibility. I think what Alden might say is that divisibility is just a broader character. Maybe is what you're saying too. Divisibility is a broader category. The subcategories of divisibility problems. One is the density problem. Another one might be like the literally not physically dividable problem, like an artwork is not divisible. You can't cut off the corner of it and have that be the fractional value of that piece of art or whatever. So, but yeah, regardless, divisibility, so density perhaps as a subcategory or type of divisibility problem. And then, so the thought is that that leads to gold needing to be needing to be held by a centralized custodian, which then leads to all of the subsequent shenanigans where it is debased essentially against the paper slips that are issued against it. Is that the like density is what leads to centralization?
I think that's a precise way to say it. So
Because if that's the case, I mean, I agree. Like a physical
yeah,
commodity occupying physical space is going to have problems in an age of transnational interactions. So in the section on the emergence of banking, we're going to get this in much greater depth. I assume chapter or part two, which we're going to begin next time, is called the birth of banks. Um, in chapter 8 is called the speed of transactions versus the speed of settlements. I think we're going to get much more into this, but Alden does mention provisionally in this chapter that banking emerged to solve the divisibility problem of gold. And she mentions the telecommunications aspect of it. So banks solve the density problem of gold too as matter that needs to be transported through space to finally settle a transaction by making it denseless through the form of the telecommunications abstraction. So paper slips of money abstract the divisibility concern away in our person-to-person interactions, and then transnationally, great distances, telecommunication further abstracts away the density problem, the physicality problem of gold to allow it to be a monetary standard. But both of these each layer of abstraction is always a layer of potential abuse by a centralized authority. Paper slips of money and telecommunication, like it just gives control to a centralized custodian to determine how these things are going to go down. And Alden is like Lowry in software, and to this extent where she just gestures towards the history that Mitchell and Ness, this credit theorist, says, everything works fine for credit when you assume highly altruistic and competent authorities. And Alden's like, what an assumption to make,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
what worse assumption could we make if you look at the history and how things have actually panned out? If you have any basic consideration of human nature, that is not an assumption you want to make. So no, I agree. Like the density problem, I think it does lead to centralization, and then that banking emerges as an form of abstraction that then gives power to a centralized custodian.
Yeah, it's a lesson in unintended consequences of.
Yeah, it all is, definitely.
You centralize the gold because you have a telecommunications network that exceeds the speed at which you can transfer the gold, and you want to be able to do business and settle business at the same speed. You want to be able to buy something and pay for it at the same, lay a claim and pay for it and settle at the same speed. And so we create this abstraction after centralizing the money. And what does it do is that it opens this Pandora's box of abuse that is, I would say, arguably far, 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 far worse for humanity overall. But it takes back to the concept of concentrated benefits and diffuse harms, where the harm of that, the harm of debasement, it hits every single person that holds that dollar. And the concentrated benefit means that it is easier for the trusted authorities to centralize their power. Otherwise they would have to figure out how to protect the gold or whatever they're using as the bearer instrument to settle. They would have to figure out how to protect it. They would have to figure out how to get it there faster. They would have to figure out how to divide it. They would have to innovate. They would have to do something better. And instead of having to do something better, what this allows the system to do is simply spread the harm over all of the participants in the network while making the role a little easier for the, and also, by the way, making them stagnant, making it so that they have an imperfect system that they are not thus trying to make better, which I think is an interesting. I just think that's interesting to consider, is that I circle back whenever I talk about Bitcoin, I circle back to how it incentivizes innovation and decentivizes growth as a driver. And so I just find that to be a really valuable kind of mindset to take when
but I think that does, for me, help me understand why the credit theorist camp is taken more seriously at this historic juncture. So prior to Bitcoin, considering what the nature of money is, you could look at it and say the commodity theorists are more correct because, like, it's the goal. A physical commodity is protected against debasement as long as technologically we haven't found a way to do it, as in with gold, in a way that credit is not. But then, actually, like, at this historical juncture where we don't have Bitcoin, but we need a way to abstract away the physical density of gold, we're going to have to rely on some sort of credit, like gold, like it's a problem with gold. Like, it requires that centralization, or it tends historically to lead to that centralization where people deposit it with an authority to transmute it into a paper slip they can carry around. Those centralized authorities then, when they need to settle at large distances, it's a hassle to bring a caravan of gold from one centralized bank to another. Telecommunications seems to solve that, as long as we accept the credit of transfer in lieu of the actual transfer. And so credit theorists, we have like a hybrid system before Bitcoin, where at least back when it was a gold standard, where the standard, it was redeemable in gold or whatever. So there seemed to be a commodity underlying it. And yet that commodity had been in practice, so its physical qualities had already been abstracted away in ways that were being abused. And so, like, to give the credit theorists camp credit, they seem to have solved the historical problem of how do we transport gold? How do we teleport it at the speed of light without something like Bitcoin? Credit allows us to do that. So we'll have a centralized system where banks extend credits to each other, rather than settle transactions physically. So I just want to, that's just to say that I don't think that credit theorists are completely ridiculous and that Alden is just rhetorically paying them homage for whatever reason. I think that she's acknowledging that maybe with the emergence of banking to take care of the density and divisibility problem, we at least did have credit seeming to be a viable source of money. And again, her abstracting away from that and saying, no, what's valuable in that is only the ledger. And again, that's also what's essential to the physical commodity, is the ledger. And I think that's going to prove to be a very smart step when we do get into the future, which is the present, and talk about Bitcoin as a way to resolve and solve the problems of the centralization of gold.
I think credit theorists get legitimacy right now because people that rode horses got legitimacy for the first 5 or 10 years after the car was invented. I think it is just merely not recognizing that a superior technology exists, and thus
But is the car in this analogy gold, or is it Bitcoin?
it would be Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Yeah, because so like no credit money can exist. Like no fiat money has ever existed that did not start as backed by something. So like credit in its truest nature, the way that it's described here,
Yeah.
it's not that it doesn't have an underlying commodity money, it's that it turns everything into an underlying commodity money, where every single good and service is monetized as debt, so that you can settle with your credit of said debt, right? And so what does that do? Well, that creates the instance where you are pricing things, like everything has to be priced in terms of everything else. It's just wholly inefficient. It involves what's called combinatorial explosion, which means that there's just too much. It's just too complex, too complicated, I guess, maybe, to be useful. So yeah, I think that credit theorists, so basically, I think that credit theorists get a buy right now because there are kind of like two types of people existing in this world right now, which are credit theorists and people who have learned about Bitcoin. And all of those people used to be credit theorists. Like that's what it was before, basically. I mean, that's what I was before. I was a master's in economics. And so I thought that you were supposed to meddle and pull levers and adjust rates and increase supply and fiddle here and fiddle there so that you can level the growth. And so I just truly think there's like people that ride horses, and then there's people that have had one ride in a car and they're like, oh, way better. Like the quote from Sherlock Holmes in the second movie that Robert Downey was in. I can't remember what the movie's called, but he says like horses are crafty at both ends and dangerous in the middle. And that to me just perfectly describes what a credit system is, what a fiat system is, because it does, just like riding a horse requires trust in a horse, and you have no idea what the horse is going to do, but you do know that it's going to prioritize itself over you.
Yeah.
That is exactly, I guess, how I would think about credit theorists. So I mean, I'm not knocking Lyn Alden at all. I think I just think that the way that she framed it gave me an opportunity to look at this and just to say, this is literally just a lesson in recognizing an advancement in technology. And by the way, it's hard to recognize.
Yeah.
Um, this is what Michael Saylor is doing right now. Is he is utterly destroying people that have no idea what he is doing. And the reason he's doing it is because he recognized that diversification is an indication that you have not solved the problem. Like, it means that you're not sure.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's why he's like, when they talk about like, oh, what's your recommended allocation for Bitcoin? He's like, well, it's the best idea.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, so does that mean your recommended allocation is 1%, 5%? He's like, it's the best idea. So you go with the best idea until it's no longer the best idea. The problem is that prior to Bitcoin, there was no best idea that existed. There were
Yeah.
all kinds of, that's why we had to have um, monetary systems, because Gresham's law existed because the reason I would argue, so Gresham's law is that bad money pushes out good, so that the good money goes out of circulation and the bad money is what is used to
Right.
transact on a daily basis,
Yeah.
right?
Right. So if
So
you have the impure coins issued by the centralized authority, people are going to
yes,
want to get rid of those, use those, and hoard the pure coins.
exactly. But the same thing right now that happens right now is that people want to transact in cash or dollars. They don't want to transact in Bitcoin. Like,
Yeah.
you look on the you can look on what's called the HODL wave, which shows like how long coins have been held, and it's like 50% of all Bitcoin has been held for like 7 years or longer. I think that's what it is, or maybe it's five
Yeah.
years. But like, you don't have dollars that you've held on to that long. Like, not really. Like, they're your retirement account, but it's just your retirement account. And what's your retirement account? It's mutual funds that are constantly, every single day, making different decisions. Oh, I own pieces of 12,000 different stocks and bonds
Yeah.
and real estate investment trusts and et cetera, et cetera. And every single day they're rebalancing. Why?
Right.
Because they don't know which one's the best idea.
Yeah.
Because today real estate's a better idea, tomorrow gold is a better idea, et cetera, et cetera. And I
Yeah.
think that's why it's so shocking and it's so hard to recognize, because there has never before existed a best idea when it comes to money.
Yeah.
There was always a fault with the dominant natural commodity money. Gold's fault was the density, which led to the divisibility problem, which led to centralization, which led to certificates being issued against it, which meant that trust was required in a higher authority,
Right.
which meant that we were going to lose that. It made me think of how Shaq couldn't shoot free throws. Like, Shaq would have been the greatest player in NBA history if he could have shot free throws. Um, and because he couldn't shoot free throws, that meant that there was a way to um, take Shaq out of circulation. So, like, just like gold was taken out of circulation, and the gold certificates were
Right.
transacted, the strategy in basketball became the hack a Shaq strategy, which was to take Shaq out of circulation by putting him on the line, and thus
Yeah.
making other players beat you. Um, I don't know. That was my metaphor for that. I thought it was
Yeah.
interesting. I
I
got,
think
I
it's
got to throw
interesting.
Shaq into it.
I know I was going to say the way that your mind works is very interesting. My mind does not have a node that is Shaq that connects to monetary theory, but it now does have one of those. So,
You're
but you
welcome.
did that. That was an excellent exposition of Bitcoin as an idea and the value of ideas, because that answers the question, the wiffle ball that I tossed at you right at the beginning, which I was sincerely curious about, which is the importance of an abstract definition of money in this way important? Like, that we get like, oh, we arrive at ledger as a theory of money. that kind of, yeah, we're taking account history, but we're really like abstracting from two existing theoretical frameworks to arrive at a framework that unifies both of them, and we get the idea of money as a ledger. Like, why is that important? And it is important because, as you mentioned, like, Saylor has infinity conviction because he has an idea and he understands this idea, and that idea entails the way that he should act. And if you have to walk people to Bitcoin to help them see that it is money, and you need a theoretical framework to do that. And maybe the commodity framework is not the best one. The credit one is definitely not the best one. So what is the framework that's going to help people germinate this idea that's going to give them this Saylor level of conviction that Bitcoin is money? And so a ledger theory, I can see where Alden's going with this. This is a good way to walk people into the future through an abstract idea, which again is necessary for the sort of conviction that one actually has to have for Bitcoin to have any value. If Bitcoin, if you have no underlying idea undergirding your belief about why you're holding Bitcoin, if it's just number go up completely, you're going to get rid of it. You're going to panic sell, all of these things. Bitcoin is one of the few areas in life where the more knowledge you have, literally more material wealth is going to come your way. Like, conviction is based on knowledge. Knowledge is based on an underlying theoretical framework. And the more you know about Bitcoin, the more you kind of bolster this theoretical framework, and the more that your conviction is thereby going to be bolstered. And so, I mean, I think it's just, I just love that. I mean, here we are talking about ideas. Ideas, we often wonder, do they have value? We're sitting here talking about an abstract idea of money, but absolutely it has value for humans who have to have some sort of understanding of in order to have any sort of conviction.
Yeah, knowledge is power. Bitcoin is power.
Yeah.
Knowledge in action is wisdom. And the wise thing to do is to take your power and project it in what you think is the most advantageous direction. So what you're doing as you deepen your knowledge is that you are further refining and intensifying the way that you project your power. And it does make sense that you might come upon something very similar in design, which is Bitcoin, which is I love Jason Lowery's definition of it as a power projection technology. It really, I think has value even in this context. I wanted to talk about, so in chapter 4, Alden talks about the ways effectively that a commodity money falls out of so the stock to flow is kind of the determinant. It's not the determinant, but it's like, of the things that can be used for money, the stock to flow is the determinant. But there's other things that she mentions that have higher stock to flow ratios, but they are less useful as money because of other things. And she notes some other things. So basically it breaks down to innovation, consumption, and discovery. So innovation would be like a technological advancement that allows you to make more of that money. Consumption would be that the utility of that money is high enough that it has a utility value that exceeds its monetary value, such that people are going to use it and consume it and take it out of supply, and necessitate more. And then discovery. So you could just simply discover more of it. And I think about this because there's, I guess El Salvador just discovered a $3 trillion deposit of gold. So, what is gold's market cap? I think it's like 10 trillion. So they just discovered 30% more of something that historically, was not increasing in supply at all. I just think it's interesting to see acted out this thing that like we know that gold is not good money, and the reason we know gold is not good money is that fiat money exists. Like fiat money doesn't
Right.
exist but to
Yep.
solve a problem that gold has.
Yeah.
um and it's just an evolution in that process, and just to see it, so I don't know what that'll take gold stock to flow ratio to, but I know right now it's like she said, gold stock to flow ratio has historically been around 50. Sometimes it's been down to like 25 up to 100. So this means that if stock to flow is 100, that means that there's 100 tons that exist, and each year one more ton is added to that, and increasing by that, just for people that don't understand. Bitcoin stock to flow right now is like 87 point something. And every 4 years, the stock to flow doubles.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it already exceeds gold, and it is going to get even harder to produce more of it. And so I think that's why we're seeing right now. Um, I do believe that we're on kind of the edge of this hyper Bitcoinization, where the game theory plays out, where it is now recognized that it is the hardest money, and we move further and further in that direction. So, anyways, that was again just it's not an advertisement for Bitcoin. It's just that I can't help but go there. Um,
I mean,
when
well,
I
that's what we see in this chapter. We get the pros and cons of each form of money, and it's hard not to read into the cons stated for each that Bitcoin is the solution to that thing. I mean, it is not debasable, so it solves the credit theorists' problem with their proposed currency, and it's not physical, and so it has all these properties, of course, that physical gold that tend, as you mentioned, tend to lead to centralization, the emergence of banking, the emergence of fiat. So yeah, just Bitcoin, if you know anything about it, immediately advertises itself as the solution once you see the problems described in detail with historical examples.
Yeah, I got a question for you. So there's three layers of value premium: the utility, the second layer is the convenience and
Yeah,
verification, the third layer is the liquidity. Does Bitcoin have utility? Because I guess I remember thinking about this in like terms of gold. So like I heard that I think 90% of the market cap of gold, of the value of gold's market cap, is monetary value, and 10% is utility value. So like
mm-hmm.
10% of it is gold being used for what it's actually useful for, which is
Yeah,
like a conductor, and this metal that is easily malleable and cannot decay and all
yeah.
that. So so there's utility even to gold, and I would argue that the reason why gold has a high stock to flow ratio is that it I feel like it has less utility than silver. I don't know if that's true, but I think so, because like gold's so soft that you can't really do a whole lot of stuff with it. Um,
I think it tarnishes less,
it
maybe.
doesn't
So
tarnish at
certain,
all.
yeah.
Yeah,
So like in certain like electrical or like computer or something applications, maybe it has higher utility, but I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I guess my question is: does Bitcoin have utility, or
That's
is everything convenience and verification, liquidity, all that
yeah,
stuff?
yeah.
Because I think that
So
actually might be true.
3 points on that. First, like those three layers of value arise in the context of gold as legal tender coinage. So that legal tender coinage, in a certain respect, introduces a bit of abstraction to gold itself. These are standards imposed by a centralized authority. So Bitcoin does not have any extra, and it need not have any extra layer of abstraction specified by an authority in order to make it standard in size, weight, quality, etc. So that's actually like an advantage. It doesn't have utility in that way, which is an advantage. Whether it does have utility is an interesting question. I think that's part of the software thesis, is that maybe the military application, or as an alternative potential infrastructure for cyberspace that is tied to the real world, these are forms of utility that it might have. I don't think this is contemplated with, so that's one, but another one, I don't think this is contemplated within this consideration of utility, but if you say utility as money, right? I mean, like the fact that it's teleportable, low fees, instantaneous. Right. I mean, I don't think that's
money. I think you want your money to only have utility as money, not as an insulator or a transmit. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So maybe, I mean, there might be software alternatives, and once we branch out and begin to consider whether coin is a metaphor that's actually, we can consider Bitcoin as other things that might have value. Maybe it has utility then, as spam protection or something like that. But yeah, no, I think generally it's good that money not have utility and instead just be an absolutely pristine store of value.
I've been rethinking about, like, since Jason's reclassification of Bitcoin as bit power. I think in my head, I just think of little cyber soldiers, like little cyber master chiefs from Halo, as like that's what every little bit is. It's like it's all. I get why Saylor describes it as a cyber hornets, an army or a swarm of cyber hornets. It makes perfect sense to me.
I think those metaphors are important too. And like, that's why I posed a question to you in one of the conversations. What is the piece of sci-fi literature or cinema that helps us conceptualize Bitcoin as bit power? And you mentioned Tron, which I think I want to go back and watch Tron now through that lens. There's also, is it William Gibson who has, I think, is it Neuromancer? It's where we get this, one of the really kind of proto ideas of cyberspace. There's lots of potential things out there. And I do want to go back and revisit these pieces of science fiction, art, literature, cinema, and just have in my mind Bitcoin while I'm reading them in order to gain conceptual clarity of what something like bit power might be. And I think there's value in that. And I hope that people begin to consciously produce art where they represent an ethereal concept like Bitcoin as a material, tractable, character-based, personality-ridden thing to help our ape minds get traction on it.
There's another one that has Justin Timberlake in it. I think it's called Out of Time, but I'm not certain, or it might just be some sort of time derivative in the title. But it's set in the future, and everybody has these little watch things that has their credits of how much time they have, and when they run out of time, they die. And so, they're constantly like he's working 2 jobs so he can get home to give his mom some time so that she can continue living. And then people bet with their time by doing this ritual of a arm wrestling thing where you're basically like trying to suck the time out of the other person. It's very interesting.
Nice.
That would be a good one. But yeah, I think Tron's my best as far as have you found
Bitcoin is bit power.
Yeah.
No, I haven't.
Anything else?
I have not. I want to. You also mentioned this last time, and your mention of this, what I'm assuming is very fine Justin Timberlake cinema. The idea that
good actor,
fantastic. The idea is that, like, to have something be about Bitcoin, it can also be about the nature of time as money, just about the nature of money, and to help us understand what money is. That will also help us understand what Bitcoin is. And like, again, back to the purpose of this chapter, very abstract consideration that this idea of the ledger underlies the existing theories of money. Why is that valuable? It's, again, going to help us get traction on something like Bitcoin. That is a new thing, and we need new models to understand it.
Yet to date, the most useful metaphor for what money is, I think, is what Saylor talks about, which is that it's like, or Jack Mallers too, a bunch of people I think have kind of adopted this approach. I think probably because it makes sense, but just that money is literally energy. It's life force. It is the way that you store what you expend your time, effort, and skill towards, and it's an abstraction of that as valued jointly by everyone. And I think thinking of it as like you think of Bitcoin as the container into which you put your life force, into which you put your
Yeah.
energy. And it just happens to be that it's the only container that doesn't leak. It's the only boat that doesn't sink. And it turns out that that's really important when it comes to a container that you're storing your life force and your energy.
Yeah. Yeah. And it
Because
might turn out that that's just an abstract ledger. That's just what the ledger is in its most abstract consideration, is a perfect container once you've taken away all real world contingency and frictions.
yeah, the perfect handbag. Who'd have
Yeah, you
thought?
got like a
It's the
did
accessory.
some very comfy heater turn
Yes,
on in your
the
house?
heater's
Because
just turned on.
I can feel the comfort viscerally in the air
Sorry.
of that hot air blowing.
I,
That's good.
I'm getting ready to take off. I'm turning the Tesla into a deer blind tonight, so I am walking out of here and going to go kill a deer in the morning. But yeah, we got a lot of heat
Brad,
action going on right now.
yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's fantastic. I hope you will apprise us as to what happens via Twitter or some other way to see if this is successful, if this is the future right here.
If nothing else, it'll be an interesting adventure to go throw a 270 in the back of a Tesla and see if I can shoot out of it. It'll be fun. Yeah. Yeah. Another great one. I think we had a good stopping point, are you?
Yeah, I think so. That's
Yeah.
what I had, man.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Again, Grant is at the whole frame on X, and I am lucasmaddy on X. And next time we will go over. So this has been chapters 3 and 4 of Broken Money. Next time we will go over 4 and 5. And yeah,
5 and
we
6.
appreciate
Yeah.
everybody. Yeah.
Right on.
All right.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, guys. Have a good one. Bye.